My name is Juan. I work for the biggest European open source foundation with most of our membership of European companies. And I'm super happy today to host this panel with these great people that will discuss some of the topics that we have heard about to them, like the resilience. Basically, it's not just a buzzword. It's something that is really impacting how technology is developed. And today's discussion is about making this vision tangible and how to secure the complex ecosystems that depend on thousands of open source components. So for starting, basically, I would like all of you, maybe we can start with Dario, just a quick introduction of yourself and a bit of background of what you do and why you are here today.
All right. Well, thank you, Juan, and thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm having so much fun. I have to say that I'm a bit of an outlier. I'm a research fellow at Elcano Royal Institute. So basically, we are the leading think tank in Spain doing geopolitics, economics, public policy, and I'm the researcher leading our research on tech and digital policy. So for me, open source is a new world, and I've started working on this 6 months ago when I joined Elcano, and I wanted this to be my first research project within Elcano because I think it's extremely linked to some of the objectives that people in Brussels and in general in tech policy have, but there is not a strong enough bridge between the development and maintainer community and public policy, so I thought that this would be a great place to start my job at Elcano.
Thank you. Georg?
I'm Georg Link. Thank you for having us on the panel. I work at Bitergia as Director of Sales. I help organizations adopt metrics and get insights to open source projects. The topic of resilience in open source specifically came to me when I was still in high school. I was part of the OpenOffice.org community back when Oracle bought Sun Microsystems. And the community self-organized and created the document foundation and forked the project into what's now LibreOffice. And just seeing how a community of volunteers, how an ecosystem of companies that are building on the technology can grow and become something that is independent and detached from the corporate overlord just fascinated me. So I made that a study in my PhD research, which then helped me found the Chaos Project, where we standardized metrics, and then I ended up at Bitergia. So that's kind of my story of how I ended up here on the stage.
Thank you. Philippe, maybe you can introduce yourself.
Yes, so Philippe Ombredan. I maintain a bunch of open source tools to figure out where the code comes from, what's the license, or the non-security issues, and eventually to produce SBOM. And we recently hired the European Commission and European Union to work for marketing, and they came with something called a CRA, which now makes that whatever we're doing is useful. I'm a co-founder of SPDX, together with John Ellis and a few others. I'm also contributing to the core team of CycloneDX, because more standards is always better. And I'm also behind a small standard called PackageURL or Perl, which happen to be used in CycloneDX, SPDX, CSAF, and a lot of other related standards and database, which helps very simply identify a software package and look it up in Vulnerability Database.
Thank you. And Stefano, please.
So I'm Stefano Zacchiaroli. I'm a professor of computer science at the Polytechnic Institute of Paris. More importantly for today, I'm a co-founder and chief scientific officer of Software Heritage, which in case you haven't heard about it, it's the largest public archive of software, which is available in source code form. And it archives both source code files and their entire development history. That has important ties with resilience, in particular ensuring the availability of source code and specific source code objects that you need every day and that your CI/CD pipelines download every day.
Okay, thank you very much. It's great to have such diversity in the panel. And the first question that I have for all of you is basically from your perspective, what's the biggest current challenge and also the opportunity in securing software supply chain? So maybe, Dario, you can start. Yes, please.
So right now, as we speak, in Valencia, they are celebrating the one-year anniversary of the flooding, where we lost more than 200 people. And still, we have the political authorities blaming each other. The regional government say, no, you didn't activate this protocol, whereas the national government says, no, you didn't act well for this and that. And in the meanwhile, the families are still recovering, and some of the insurance haven't been activated yet. The cliff where the flooding happened still hasn't been fixed. And if the same levels of rain happened again, we would have the same flooding. I don't know if the protocols and the messaging would have improved. Probably yes, because there's been so many protests about that. But my point here is, I think that, and bringing it to technology development, I think that we are not building technology for the right goals. I think we are building technology for the sake of it, and sometimes for in a constant competition with different stakeholders and other geopolitical actors. And I think that that's really a pity, and we can really see how the balance of power when it comes to tech policy has totally shifted, and it's upside down. When we look at classic political industry or conversations between geoeconomic actors, we could identify the public authorities and the civil society having more power than they have now, where we see a big tech sector that is extremely powerful, and the rest of actors, so the governments, civil society, small companies, communities, having a lot less power in these negotiations that they used to have. And we actually see policymakers, you mentioned the CRA, and many other pieces of regulation and policy that are coming to mitigate the harm that has already been produced by technology. Whereas I believe that we should be building the technology we want and not building or mitigating the risk and the harm produced by the technology that others wanted. So I've told Daniel many times that I really agree with the approach that or that the team has suggested for this in general for this forum, because it's using resilience first. I think it would be a fallacy, and some people, I've heard some people speak about how open source or how their specific technology can help with resilience or with other society goals, and I don't think it should go that way. That's a fallacy. What we should prioritize is our common goals, in this case, resilience, and then see how, with the skills we have and with the technologies we have, how we can contribute to that, and also what risks emerge. And this is in my short time, like I said before. I've only been in here for a very short time, so I'm really not an expert. I'm more of a generalist. I think that the conversation should be framed that way. So what priorities do we have in terms of resilience? And then through that, seeing how to fix or how to secure the digital supply chain. Otherwise, we are just talking about things just for the sake of them. And if you ask main policymakers or people who are working on security issues, they will tell you that the biggest weaknesses of our digital societies are the fact that American corporations are controlling a lot of the stack, and that makes us more vulnerable when it comes to negotiating. And if you look at defense expenditure, Europe has had to make a huge promise to spend a lot of money on defense, even if that goes against the rest of the budget, just to please Donald Trump. And the reason why we have to please Donald Trump is because we already depend greatly on American technologies. So this is one of the aspects. Other aspects are how social media and very widespread digital products that are deeply ingrained in our societies are toxic for us. And we keep using them, and that's the whole point of a toxic substance, right? That you use it more and more. This is one of the worries biggest worries that we have. And the fact, it's been said many times today, that most tools we use are built for commercial purposes. And that's great. Like, commercial purposes drive innovation and creation of new technologies, but we don't see the influence of other actors in the design of technologies. So for me, this is the greatest challenge, but I also want to frame it as an opportunity. And if there is a community and if there is a group of people who understand this challenge as an opportunity, it's definitely this one in front of me.
Good points. Thank you, Dario. George. Dario brought a few things on the table. Yeah.
So you were asking about the challenges and opportunities that we have right now, and we already heard a lot today. A big change that is coming is that the software industry as a whole is moving from being unregulated to being regulated. And there are good reasons for that, because historically we've built software to solve specific problems. And when we solved that problem, we're like, it's done. And we would open source it. Others would be like, oh, let's use it. And we're all happy until it's used in a new context, it's widely used, and the system breaks down, and we have banks don't giving us money, trains not driving, hospitals not operating. And we cannot accept that anymore. And I think we are at a place now where software needs to be built in a different way. And that is the mandate that we hear from governments coming. And a big challenge in getting there is a lot of the software development is done in like a black box. We don't have data on how it's actually being done, that the software is built, who is involved, what are they doing, how is the collaboration happening, and we need more transparency. And that's where I think the opportunities lie. Now that we are forced to do something about the situation, we need to bring more transparency into the process and have better data about how our software is built, where it comes from, have that provenance.
Thank you. Philippe?
So I'm going to say exactly the same thing that Jörg just said. To me, the problem is that we're flying blind. I challenge anyone in this room to give me, in the next 10 minutes, a list of all the software package, open source package that you use in your organization. And if you're able to produce that, to produce correct information about origin, license, and known security issues. And it all boils down to having correct, curated, trustable data about open source software, how it's being used, where it's coming from. That's the real challenge. The challenge, if it's not addressed by the open source community and users and authors at large, is that you have commercial vendors that are telling you they know better than any of us about our own software package, and they have special secret data about 0 day in open source software that only they have. That's pernicious, and I think I'm a data socialist, and we should have open data about open source software.
Thank you. Stefan, please.
Yeah, so two challenges. So the first one is that it's something that we take for granted, like in a room like this, but we still don't have enough open source software in the software supply chain. Okay, we all start our conversation by the statistics about how many IT products on the market contain open source software, and they also usually they are very high statistics. But those IT products, for the most part, also contain proprietary parts. And when we frame the conversation, as Dario put it before, about the insecurity or the problem of the open source software supply chain, we're kind of implying that the problem comes from the open source components. And if you look at the problem we have in the open source software supply chain, which we do have, the equivalent problem in the proprietary software supply chain are even worse. So just keep this in mind, and please, when we are cornered in a conversation about open source software supply chain, take the time to clarify that with your partner. And the opportunity here is that the regulators are taking notice. And I'm not thinking about CRA here for a minute. I'm talking about the fact that regulators, especially public regulators today, are less likely to accept running proprietary software for mission-critical infrastructure if they have the alternative of open source software. Okay, so this is, for me, is a big opportunity that we need to keep in mind. The second challenge is, here I'm just echoing what Georg and Philip mentioned, but I frame it as traceability. So we need traceability all along the software supply chain. So vendors need traceability of the software component, the open source software component they receive from their providers, and they need to provide that information to their downstreams. Users, like you, when you're running an app on your phone, need to know which specific software components you're running to know about the vulnerabilities. And here, what's special about open source software is that anyone can modify it, and a lot of people do modify it before embedding it in your software. So knowing exactly the precise software version of each software component you run is very difficult. And here, the opportunity is some of the standards that have already been mentioned, the SBOM standards, some software identification standards. Those help a lot, but we still have a long way to deliver full traceability to the final users.
Thank you, all of you. I think that there are several aspects that have been raised during the conversation, from the more technical ones that really relies on the implementation of things to more strategic political aspects that are also important. So, Dario, open source is global and has been clearly stated today. But how this global community is being impacted by all the geopolitical dynamics that we have today?
Let me follow up on what you said, Stefano, about the open source not being the most problematic part of the stack when it comes to security. I totally agree. And I had this mental process when I was trying to explain to people who are new to open source why it's a relevant issue when it comes to security. And while I was explaining it, I said, okay, well, obviously it's an issue, but there are bigger issues that I'm bringing up in this same conversation. So obviously, it's like if you are sick in your lungs, for example, and you go to the dermatologist because they say, my skin is not so perfect. It's good to be a perfectionist in every organ, right? But you also need to prioritize which ones are the most problematic ones. So in these few months that I've been researching open source from the angle of geopolitics and geoeconomics, I've identified, or I've borrowed some of your ideas to identify two power dynamics that are very interesting. The first one is the corporate capture of open source. So there is a paper, and I think some of the authors might be here in the room, that says that looks at the percentage of commits in PyTorch, TensorFlow, and Transformers from Hugging Face to quantify that 80% of the commits come from hosts. So this already is a piece of statistics that demonstrates that the hosts of these platforms are the ones that are intervening the most here. And this first dynamic links very closely with the second dynamic, which is the geopolitization. Well, this implies that it wasn't geopolitical before, which is not true. But my point is that 2025 is the best year to explain the concept of weaponization of interdependencies, which was brought up in 2019, but this year is perfect to explain it because basically we've been enjoying decades of collaboration and interconnection and commercial links and tech diffusion, and now we see that that's being used by the main powers in geopolitics as coercion, right? To negotiate and to get the best deals for your country in a zero-sum game. And Alice Panier from Elcano Equivalent in France, IFRI, she says that open source has had so much success in becoming a critical technology that now it's also being affected by this geopolitical trend, which is that it's used by the main powers to concentrate even more power in the digital realm. And very quickly, and once again, I think that this is not as problematic as when you look other factors, but we are talking about open source, so it's also interesting to identify the problems. So the US is doing it through public-private partnerships. They understand the great importance of open source for their national security, and they will, whenever they can, their jurisdiction will force the providers of these platforms to comply with their national security needs. On the other side, we know that China also considers open source critical in their strategy to be sovereign. And Xi Jinping launched the history's most important infrastructure project, Belt and Road Initiative, where they have invested in building infrastructure not only in Asia, also in the Middle East, in Africa, in Europe, and in Latin America as well. And they do so so they will collaborate and they will build infrastructure in your country using their standards. And when they export their standards, they also do so with open source. So I think that these trends are normal because I understand the geopolitical dynamics and open source is no different. But I also think that it goes against the universal nature of open source and that it adds a new vulnerability because if you have, let's say, a fragmented open source, you will have fewer people to audit and to patch and to identify bugs. So this leverage of mutualizing risk actually becomes a new risk.
Good points. Yeah, Stefano, you mentioned before about integrity, and basically one of my next question is, what's the role that software heritage is playing in this context?
Yeah, so one point about integrity is that when we mention specific software products like OpenSSL 3.0 or something like that, those mentions are not enough to be verifiable. So you can say this product that I integrated is OpenSSL 3.0, but you're not actually sure if the source code which is behind that label is actually what you had in mind. And this goes back to the traceability we mentioned before. And so we need to have a software supply chain which is fully traceable and provide clear artifacts all along the chain. So in that respect, what we have worked on in Software Heritage is to create a standard for software identification, which has become an ISO standards a few months ago, which is called SWID, SWHID, for software hash identifiers. And using that standard, you can identify specific source code objects. They can be files, they can be commits, they can be full directories of code, they can be releases, using a cryptographically strong identifier, which then you can give it around. And people who receive that identifier together with a specific corresponding source code artifact can verify that the source code artifacts actually match the identifier without depending on anyone, just computing a checksum under some specific condition. So this is something that we have contributed to the industry and has been integrated in a bunch of the standards that we mentioned before. It is NSPDX. I don't know if it is in CycloneDX. Philippe, maybe we should look into that.
If it's not, it should.
OK, thanks, Philippe. That's one key feature we are contributing to the ecosystem. And the second one is archival. So as it happens, we all depend on a bunch of external software components, which are open source, as we have mentioned before. But a lot of the actors on the market do not actually host themselves the source code of those dependencies. So for instance, most of their automated processes tend to start with a Git clone from a specific repository, checking out a specific commit in that repository, and then doing your build. The problem is, if your Git clone is systematically on GitHub or any other platform that you do not control, that platform can go down temporarily, can be disbanded for any reason, or you can lose access to it for geopolitical reasons that have been mentioned essentially all the day today. So an archive like Software Heritage can be your third party, where if you guarantee that you are archiving there all your source code when you use it at the specific version you are using and identify it with a SWID, then if your primary distribution platform is going down, you can fall back to the archive to retrieve it and avoid that your builds break. We have already done this kind of work together with a project like Geeks, and we're working doing the same with Nix, which are a functional package manager with a huge ecosystem of packages, and they're actually seeing that their essentially build rates goes up if you do that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Stefano, you just point out well, some of the technical challenges that are in place. And I will ask to Philippe, basically, what are the tools, standards that are currently in place to be used to help companies to trust in open source software?
So there's two ways to think of it. One is the golden path, which is the path that Stefano just mentioned, which means you have clear end-to-end traceability of every bit of code that you put in the software product that you build, be it a device, an application, a container else. The difficulty is that we need to get there, and before we can get there, we need to realize that we cannot immediately adopt this golden path. We need tools to actually do something like unbaking the cake. You have a binary, what it is made of. And maybe you get an SBOM that would be happy. Is this SBOM actually correct? Is the inventory of software package that were built into this binary actually match what's really there? There's some place to help. John Ellis was talking earlier today about this TSF project to also provide this strong verifiability and traceability. Until we get there again, the approach going to be, one, being able to reverse engineer and check and verify what we put in the software after the fact. It's complex, it's more of an art than a science in many cases, but there's no other path. And that's where you'll find that maybe a binary contains OpenSSL, even though it was never disclosed. The second thing there is, eventually it's all about data. So having correct data about each open source package matters. What we see today is that each software team that cares about reusing open source will go and do thorough analysis of each package versions, eventually using the same open source tools. They're ruining the planet by wasting precious compute resource and energy. We already have AI taking care of that, so we don't need more with open source package scanning. We need to find ways to share the data produced by these tools so we never scan twice the same package with the same tool. And we need also, on top of that, to have standards which are easy to relate to, like SWID, like package URL, so we can reference that one copy of a scan, that one copy of the metadata, that one copy of an analysis made by an open source analyst here, that we can pull together without having to redo the same thing twice over and over again.
Thank you. We have spoken about tools, about open source in general, and one of the key things are the communities. So, Jörg, I want to ask you, trust in open source is great, contributing and joining the community is necessary, but how do you envision this new scenario to impact open source communities?
The impact on open source communities is something we'll see how it plays out. I can look in my crystal ball a little bit and anticipate how the global forces that Dario had mentioned and the practices that Stefano and Philippe said we are working towards on the software side. On the community side, which complements everything that we have talked about, we need to recognize that there are different kinds of open source projects. So we cannot make a general statement about how an open source community is going to respond because, and we can look at the Mozilla Archetypes report to see there are many different kinds of projects. If it's a vendor-driven open source project, the vendors have, in their own interest, they need to make sure the software that they get from the project and that they're working in provides the certainty that they need for their own compliance. And so they will pressure the projects, the communities to respond. One thing we don't currently have in open source, for example, is an announcement that is kind of through the back door. Hey, we have a vulnerability, you need to update ahead of time. So those are infrastructure that the communities will start to establish to respond to the new pressures that we have in the space for how we develop software. There are other projects like hobbyist projects that don't need this. They will respond in different ways, but this is all crystal ball right now. And for trust, I think the crucial element is we need to analyze the software, analyze the packages. We also need to analyze the communities. We need to know who is in the community. Do we trust them to do the right thing? How are they collaborating? Are there silos? Is there breakdown of communication? There are many things we can look at. And over the years, we've built out more than 80 metrics in the Chaos project that, talking about in practice, that can be used today to start analyzing this.
So you all have touched from the geopolitical aspects to how communities are working. We are running out of time, so I want to ask you one closing statement from each of you. Maybe we're going to start from this side. Stefano?
Yeah, so I guess as a digital archivist, which is essentially what I became over time, when you depend on some external open source component, please verify which kind of infrastructure you are depending on. Consider mirroring it on your infrastructure to be more resilient when that external component goes away. If you cannot afford mirroring it yourself, save it to some archive. It can be software heritage. It can be something else if you prefer. Reference it with a strong identifier like SWID or whatever else you can use to verify integrity a posteriori, and then add fallback mechanism. Doing that will go a long way to strengthen to increase your resilience in building your software for your customers.
Philippe?
I build open source tool. They're probably the least worst you can get out there. Don't trust your tools. We did a study comparing the output of most of the well-known commercial and open source scanners to produce correct SBOMs, with a very low bar being correct SBOM having the correct list of package known to be used in a bunch of software containers, Docker containers. Not one tool was able to get the right curated manual analysis that we had done, not even ours, not even mine. And it's really problematic because you have either over-reporting, which will create extra work for package you don't use. There's a lot of ghosts, even without AI. Or you have under-reporting where you're not including in your inventory package that may be vulnerable that are used in your product. So just call to arms, don't trust your tools, look at where you can have an impact, which is using open source to make them better.
Dario, please.
Yesterday we had another meeting, and Juan, you said that what you think is great about open source is the lack of product managers, being one yourself. And I didn't get it, so I had to ask you today for you to explain to me. Now I get it. But I think that when building this bridge with government and policy, it should be the opposite. We should have more product managers in government who apply some foresight and some long-term strategic goals into how we produce technology. See it as a runway, right? Like when your startup has a long runway and more money, you can create a roadmap and create fantastic expectations of your new technology. Whereas if you have a short runway, and I know this from experience, you only have to care about selling and surviving. And I think that I started my intervention talking about flooding, but data suggests that climate change catastrophes are going to happen more and more, not to mention erosion of social cohesion and democracies. There's so much data to support that. And I think that this is going to be technology-led, and the solution to it as well. So if governments enter a short runway mindset, they will only be trying to solve the problems while they're happening, right? Like, so I think that this is going to happen inevitably, but there should also be some more long-time thinking. And for that, I really admire the horizontality of open source, right? So people are spending their own time and resources to fix something they care about or to build something they care about. So what can policymakers learn from this bottom-up approach and the governance of it? And also, how can the governance of open source improve to respond to the new challenges that policy has?
Yeah. George. all on
Dario,
you.
what you said feeds right into what I was about to mention,
You're
because there is no community that you're not building. So the only community is the one that you are building, is the phrase I want to end with. And when we have those long-term strategic management of software, you can't do that top-down without getting your hands dirty and being part of the solution. You need to get involved, and the software, we've seen this, the software ages very quickly unless there is someone to take care of it, unless there is a community and someone doing the work, it's gonna fail. So be part of the solution.
Great. So thank you very much, Stefano, Philippe, Dario, and Jörg. And with this, we are closing the panel, and thank you very
Thank
much
Juan
all
as
of
well.
you as well.